Now that all the yarn is caked up from the Reclaiming Yarn projects, I want to give you a little step-by-step for how I'm making this oversized cardigan. I'll share this in a series with the separate steps. The instructions for the first few rows are showing on the screen so you can pause and see what you need to do for each row. When we get to the fifth row, you'll just repeat the pattern over and over again until it's the size you want. So then you can come back and do the steps all over again because the first part of the oversized cardigan is actually making two different panels. I'm only going to show you the process of making one, and then when I'm ready, I'll come back for step 3 to show you how to sew or crochet it all together. Other videos may have slightly different instructions for how you start this project or how to start a granny square. I'm sharing what works best for me in hopes that this may help some others figure out a way that works best for them. I find that I am better able to work on and finish projects when I'm not trying to follow all the rules. Instead, I use the rules as inspiration, compare it to what works for me and what I've done before, and I kind of just make things my own. Ultimately, if you're familiar with a granny square, this is just like that, except instead of having 4 corners, you add 2 extra corners, so there are 6 corners. When you get to the step 2 video, you'll see it start to take the shape of the cardigan a little bit when you fold it in just the right way. So as I'm posting this video, I am still working on making this cardigan. So if you're watching this when it's first posted, you may need to wait a couple weeks or more before the final steps are posted. I'll ask for your patience for that. The other thing you'll want to consider if you're making this yourself is how much yarn you need and what colors you want it to be. My kid asked for purple, and I had some old projects with this purple multicolor yarn, but I knew I wasn't going to have enough, so I'm mixing it with the same type of yarn that comes in black, white, and gray. I can't tell you exactly how much you're going to need because it's very personal, how big you want it, etc. But many people will change colors and others have solid colors for a cardigan like this. So I'm always one to just try to get extra yarn just in case. The one I made for myself last year has Reggie Biv colors because I love rainbows, and I'm currently wearing it right now while I record this. And I had some leftover skeins from a rainbow blanket that I made. I did end up having to go and get more yarn, and it's not perfectly symmetrical, but it's something I wear often during the winter to help me warm up, and the rainbow colors really make me happy. I'm curious if you follow the rules or follow a pattern when you're making projects, or if you're somebody like myself who just kind of wings it, or you get inspiration and then you figure something out based on that inspiration. Let me know below in the comments, and I hope you follow along for more. So this video is for step 2. If you haven't yet seen step 1 for making the oversized cardigan, you will want to go to my page and go back and check out step 1 for that. After you have finished step 1 of getting started on this oversized cardigan, you get to just kind of continue repeating the same steps for each row over and over and over again. This is exactly my type of pattern because I don't really have to think about it. It's great for watching TV or riding in the passenger side of my best friend's ride. The most I have to count is 3. For each space between the 3 double crochets on the prior row, I crochet 3 double crochets, and then for each corner, I add 2 chains and 3 more double crochets. This means that for each row, we're adding 6 sets of 3 double crochets because there are 6 corners. Then around and around we go. Where you stop is completely up to you and when you're happy with the size of it. This is an oversized cardigan, not something that is meant to fit the shape of any one person in particular. So you just keep going and going and going until it's done. Don't forget that when you get it to the size you want, you will need to start over again and go back to step 1 and get started on that second panel because this project does take 2 panels to make the oversized cardigan. And I hope to come back with step 3 within a couple of weeks when I have finished it. Thanks for following along. When you see 2 panels finished, hear crochet hooks clinking, won't you join together with the yarn? Okay, so this step is pretty straightforward compared to some of the other steps. I am showing how I sewed together the back parts of the two panels. Make sure that you lay them out and you're happy with how it looks in the front and the back before you start sewing. You can fold the panels many different ways to try to hide the seams or color changes if that is something you want to do. Ultimately, this step is the first step for completing the project. Some of the steps are really optional and based on personal preference, but this step and the next step are required to truly make a cardigan. You could use this step for connecting panels in the front to make a pullover sweater instead of a cardigan if that is what you would prefer. I'm showing the process for using a tapestry needle to tie it together. In the next step, I'll show you what it's like if you instead use a crochet hook with a single crochet for connecting. This tapestry needle method is not my go-to method, but I wanted to give it a try and show how it can be done using this method. My preferred method is to use a single crochet for tying the two sides together. What is your preferred method for tying together two sides of a crochet project? Is there a reason for your preference? For me, I prefer using the single crochet method because it is both easier to only work with the amount of yarn I need for each stitch instead of having to pull the full length of the yarn through like with this tapestry needle. My other thought is that if you have to pull pieces apart to fix something in your crochet project, it's a lot easier to do that for me when it's a crocheted edge versus this pull through method. I've mentioned before that I don't read or really use patterns when I'm making stuff. I will watch videos, I'll get inspired by seeing what other folks have made, and then I usually just try to create something that speaks to me. Some people like the structure of having a pattern to read. Ultimately, I'm all about the stress-free method. Whichever method allows you to enjoy the process more and produces the least amount of stress for you while you're working on your crochet project is the right method for you to use. It may be a bit messy for me to crochet without patterns, and I may end up with lots of tangles. For me, it helps me enjoy the creativity of crocheting a lot more. Stay tuned for step 4. So here I am with open arms, hoping you'll see what crochet means to me. Open arms. And in this case, instead of meaning I have an open heart and I'm ready for a loving embrace, it means our cardigan isn't done yet. So let's turn these open arms into cozy sleeves. This part of the process is very similar to step 3 and relatively straightforward. Now that you have tied together the back ends, you want to tie together the top of the sleeves. But before you get started, I do recommend marking out room for the neck using some sort of markers. I only recently got some of these little things, but you can use anything. You can use a little paper clip, safety pins, whatever you have lying around. You do not have to purchase special markers just to make this cardigan. Speaking of not purchasing things just for this project, I also didn't have tapestry needles until recently. I think it's good for crocheters, both beginners and experienced, to know that there are multiple ways to do things instead of stressing about one way that doesn't work for you or thinking about all the things you need to buy to make something just right. So for this method of tying the sleeves, I'll share my preferred method that I mentioned in step 3. I do prefer to use a single crochet to attach two panels or two sides in a crochet project. I've seen it done using different methods for different projects, and I think it's good to have options. But ultimately, if you only have your yarn and crochet hook, don't let it stop you from making projects. Just use your hook to thread the yarn through and use a single crochet if that works for you. Now, I also want to note that I do end up having this side be on the inside of the cardigan. That to me looks a little cleaner, but if you want the single crochet to be shown or you instead use a tapestry needle to tie these together, just know that it's perfectly acceptable to do whatever feels right for you. After you make your cardigan, if you were to come to me with arms wide open, I'll have to assume you skipped this step. And if you want to be done after this step, frankly, you can be done. You have a cardigan. The next few steps are really meant to show some finishing touches, including adding the buttons. Stay tuned for those and check out the prior steps for how we got this far and let me know how your project is currently going. Don't forget at the end to tie in those loose ends. Sometimes when I'm finishing projects, it feels like I'm going to lose my mind. You just keep on pushing my yarn over the borderline. So, adding step 5 to our series, this part is completely optional and based on your preference and taste. I think it's fine to finish your cardigan at step 4, but if you are like me, you may want a border to have a different edge or look than the granny square look. So, to get that, you can go back and forth doing the half double crochet in the front post. I always find crocheting in the front post to be a little tricky because the counting that I am not really doing is really easy to miss a stitch, drop a stitch, or slowly over time, your project will shrink or grow. So what works for me when doing a crochet stitch like this is that after finishing crocheting on all the front posts, I will do an extra stitch in the last stitch of the prior row right next to the last front post stitch. This gives you just the right number of front posts for the next row and should keep that stitch count really pretty even. Also, since I hate the counting part of crocheting, instead of counting every single row, I will just count every few rows or every so often. If I dropped a stitch in a prior row, I'll just add a stitch right next to that last stitch. And if I accidentally added a stitch, I won't crochet in the last stitch of the prior row. I'm not frogging my work or finding where I added or dropped a stitch. That is not worth it to me unless I feel like things are looking quite wonky and I want to go back a little bit to fix that. So the other thing I do when trying to work in the perpendicular, like we're doing for this border, is when I finish each row on the side of the work that we're attaching it to, instead of the chain one and turn your work method, I will do a single crochet or slip stitch or half double crochet in the next stitch of the work that we're attaching the border to, and that really acts like that chain one before you turn your work. Others might make the border first and then attach it later, but for me, doing it this way, I don't have to count how many rows are needed or measure anything or worry about it not fitting. Instead, by working into it, I know that it's when I'm done with the border that it will fit perfectly. What tips or tricks do you have for crocheting without reading a pattern? If you're going to make buttonholes, I want to see you go back, back, forth and forth. Let me see you go back, back, forth and forth. So we are back with step 6 of the series for making buttonholes while also crocheting on a border for that front panel. It's completely up to you what side you want your buttonholes on. I would say do whatever feels right to you. But the way we start the step is just like step 5. Again, this is completely optional and you can do this cardigan without buttons. So if you're not adding the buttons, you can skip that part of this step. If you are adding the buttons, just make sure that you mark them in whatever way makes sense for you. Paper clips, bobby pins, whatever you have. You do not need special yarn markers for this project, but you do want to try to space them out evenly if you can. You'll also want a button handy to know how big you need the buttonhole to be. I have quite large buttons, so make sure that when you're doing your buttonholes that they match the size of your buttons. Don't just follow along exactly with how big my buttonholes are. If you make your buttonholes too big, the buttons might not stay buttoned. So finishing this cardigan really was an all weekend project for me between connecting the panels, adding the borders, and working on the buttons. Honestly, oftentimes I lose steam before I end up finishing a project, and I'll end up starting another project and letting something like this sit for months before I finish it. This time, though, I was super excited to share this work with this community, and I hope that it can help inspire some others or help people know that if you know how to crochet, that you 100% can make this cardigan without reading a pattern. I don't read patterns, and I like to keep my work simple enough to follow along without a pattern. All you need to remember is I want to see you go back, back, forth and forth. Stay warm out there. Now it's time to crochet on the buttons, babe, right on the front and on the front of your on the front of your cardigan, you'll want to start by marking out where the buttons are going to attach. I decided to connect both side edges together, so I was literally sewing the button where it would fit inside of the buttonhole. That probably isn't a normal way to do this, and it did cause a lot of rework for me, but it's what I decided to do. So that gave me the opportunity to make sure the buttons would fit perfectly. Something else I learned is that my tapestry needles are too large for buttons. I talked to a friend recently that shared that they experienced the same thing. So, what I found is that these super tiny crochet hooks seem to work well for threading through the buttonholes. I assume you would also be able to use regular sewing needles for this, but I didn't feel like finding those or pulling them out. So, I used my super tiny crochet hooks. What have you used to sew on buttons for a cardigan or a project like this? And also, what advice would you give to others that are trying to crochet a cardigan or some sort of sweater like this? This is the last video of the Cozy Crochet Cardigan series. And this series is where I use some reclaimed yarn from old projects to make this large oversized cardigan for my kid after they had asked for it. This is probably one of my favorite projects that I've worked on in a while because my kid was so excited about it. And I'm curious what projects you've worked on recently to give to others that you were really excited to give to them, or something that they were really excited to receive when you were done. Thanks for following along, and I hope that this cardigan will help you stay warm on those icy winter days.